Hi, and welcome to our podcast. I'm your host, Howard Drukarsh. I've been a successful realtor in Canada's largest market for over 30 years. And in the latter part of my career, I co-founded Canada's largest independent brokerage, Right at Home Realty. In 2020, I retired to start this podcast, and it's been a remarkable opportunity to meet with successful and highly interesting guests to find out about their careers and get their insight into our business. Today's guest is Andrew Fogliato. And before I introduce Andrew, I want to talk a bit about how we met. About 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Ontario Real Estate Association had a fantastic conference called Reality Plus. I was there as a guest. Andrew was there presenting, and this is why we wanted him as a guest, presenting himself as the new owner of Real Estate Magazine. And I've known Rem since I started in the business, go back to when Jim Adair was there, and even myself and my late partner, Arthur Bartram, had been front page featured on Rem. And so I was delighted to meet Andrew. And also his editor, his new editor, Jordana Springay. And so having met them, I thought they'd be great guests because most of the people who watch our podcast are real estate agents. And I'd say all of them know Rem. So I really appreciate Andrew taking time this morning. And we're going to get right to the podcast. So Andrew, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
So our audience is always interested in how people got into real estate because primarily our audience is real estate people, agents, developers, people like that. In your own situation, were there entrepreneurs in your family?
Yeah, on both sides of the family. So like my father, who probably learned from the most on it, he owned a concrete forming company for many years. Mm-hmm. He was moved out to Calgary in the early 80s. It's where both my brothers were born, doing stuff out there. Then when the National Energy Plan came in, they moved back and continued the business here. And then my grandfather, so my nono before him, did the same thing. And then my grandfather on the other side of the family, if you know Mary Hill Golf Course in Guelph, so him and a few of his friends actually like bought a farmland, cleared it, put a golf course on it, and then more recently being relative here, he was one of the originals with St. Andrews Valley in Aurora. So that was also one of the big things for him. So yeah, basically my whole life I've been surrounded by entrepreneurs.
So I guess that begs the question: do you play golf?
Not well, or anymore. So I started to get pretty good when I worked at the golf course, because as a high school student, when your grandfather owns it, you just get given a job basically and told you're working now.
Okay.
So but sometimes like before and after my shifts, the golf pro for free would start like giving me a few lessons. But unfortunately, when I was about 16, I developed a pretty bad allergy to grass, which makes golfing quite difficult. Mm-hmm. So I don't really golf anymore. Like end of the season now, I can kind of, with some meds, get through a round or two. But when you can only play max a round or two a year at the end of the season, it doesn't lend to good golfing. So that shut down my career pretty quick.
Well, it gave you and this is always the important thing, I think, it gave you the vision and the understanding of what it is to be an entrepreneur. And it really, you can read about it forever. But I was a real estate agent for 20 years before starting Right at Home with my two partners. And, running a business is another world. And for anybody listening who's thinking it's easier, it's 24/7. And the rewards are there if you do it right. But I think for you to have family members and you could see what they went through to build a business. Like no business is easy, but I can imagine all the issues building anything where weather's important and supplier issues and
unions,
right?
All that. It was a lot. Like I remember one of my favorite things when I worked for my dad we rented a unit that was actually owned on a property by my nono, and he has like he came here from Italy with basically nothing after the war. Built everything up, lost everything, and then built it back up again. And just coincidentally, he needed an office space, and my office had room, so we put a desk in my office with my grandfather. And basically, him and I, there was many times where we just like sat and chatted about business lessons and stuff like that. And those are some of my favorite years.
Oh, great!
Before I started my own company.
So you really got some good background in this.
Yeah.
So let's
a lot of support.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's take it to Just Sell Homes, which I know that was the company you own before you recently took over ownership of REM. So how did you get into Just Sell Homes? And for those that may not know the company, tell us, give us a pitch. We got a lot of audience here.
Yeah. So we're a digital marketing agency that focuses on the real estate industry in Canada specifically. So like we are primarily, like our bread and butter historically has been like Facebook ads, email marketing. But with clients, we'll work on kind of their larger strategy as well. But I actually started as a real estate agent in Aurora. So I was with Bill Jenkins, who at the time, I believe it was Remax York Group. We got bought out and we went up with a different brokerage, still under the same kind of brand. But I started like building everything online. I was trying everything. I tried cold calling, door knocking. That did not work for me, to be honest. Like I got a deal on the second house I ever door knocked and thought this was going to be the easiest career. And that was about the last deal I ever got door knocking.
When was it that you switched to building Just Sell Homes?
So I ended up, when we got bought out by a bigger brokerage,
Yeah.
I started doing trainings in the office because they asked me to like train other agents on what I was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And then through that, one of the big brands ended up seeing that, recruiting me to train agents. I ended up traveling North America training agents.
Wow.
And this was just as we were switching to going paperless. But then every time I did training, it was people always asking, can you just do this for me? And I remember one time I was sitting with an old mentor of mine from my sales days, and he actually was just like, he had paid me to evaluate website providers for him and just pick the right website, get it up there. And he goes, "Can I swear?" It's a direct quote.
Let me check. Mr. Price, a thumbs up from the producer. Yes.
Right. So he says, "I don't want to do this shit anymore. I just want to sell homes."
It makes sense though, doesn't
it? And then it just kind of, the name kind of stuck with me there.
Yeah.
And I just looked up, like in the room with him still, justsellhomes.com, saw it was available, bought it. And then like the idea. So like at the time, my training partner, because there was two of us traveling together, the company was actually originally her idea. And then we co-founded it together. Long story short, I ended up buying her out, and she does some training stuff now. But yeah, we started it because basically people kept asking us to, and I realized I liked that better. Because when I originally went into the training side, my plan was actually to come back to sales and be a real estate agent again. And like what I was thinking is every time I went on stage, I said Aurora 3 times. So I'm like, I'm going to build the best referral network that ever existed. Everyone's going to know me as the Aurora guy. I'm going to get all the referrals. But then as I'm doing it, I'm like, okay, I like this marketing side of the business more. And so then when I started out, I just called up my mentor, the one who actually gave me the idea for the name, and said, "Hey, guy," it was a couple named Marcel, or not a couple, they were a partnership. They weren't together. My name Marcel and Barb in Aurora. And I was like, "Hey, you know how you guys have tried to hire me in the past? Well, now you can." They're like, "Great." I gave them the price. They're like, "Sounds great." I was like, "By the way, I need 6 months up front." And so they gave me 6 months up front. The next call went the same, where I asked someone else, said, "Here's the price. By the way, I need 6 months up front." They both did it. And I was kind of off and running that was about 7.5 years ago. So July of 2015.
So timing is everything, right? I mean, you got into this because you saw the need, right? Yeah. And I remember the early days of, digital. Actually, digital followed cell phones. Like cell phones were kind of the first step into this. I remember when, cell phones were first in cars. Then they were in suitcases the size of this desk, and then but then I think that really triggered where things could be done in a more mobile way, and you could present things. And I was an agent for 20 years, and prospecting is everything. I mean, when people used to ask me, "What do you do as an agent?" I'd say, "Well, every day I prospect for business, and some weeks I get paid more than others." So the time, and the other thing is, I've been successful, or Adam and I have been successful, putting this podcast together. And people ask, how do you do so much social media? It's because I don't sell anymore. This is my full-time job, right? So you understood that an agent couldn't be putting in all those hours and put in all the hours it takes to do social media.
Yeah, and like that's where we work, because like we get clients all the time now come in and be like, "I need to spend all this time on social." Like we'll make plans for people who only have 15 minutes in a week. Like we had a team we were working with there, they were doing 400 plus deals a year. The team leader was still the one doing the social. Like that is a horrible use of their time.
Really? Wow.
For the most part.
Yeah.
Like there's still some scenarios where it is. So we're like, you can develop plans based on your time available.
Yeah. So it was a great business. So I was going to ask you what motivated you to start just sell homes, but you just answered the question. Opportunity.
Perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I just saw an opportunity, and there's not a lot of competition directly in Canada that focuses on the real estate industry. Like, yes, there are competitors, but most are not real estate focused.
Okay. And if they're in the US, they're in US dollars, I would assume.
Yeah, well, there's even some Canadians who charge in US dollars, so like it's another advantage that we have.
Oh, good for you. So before we get to REMS, since this was kind of your first, other than being a real estate agent, this was your first real estate business venture. What lessons did you learn from starting Just Sell Homes?
I mean, a lot. There was a lot because like I did it really quick. Like I kind of had the idea, we started right away, and it kind of became like I brute forced it, but there was no systems, and then it scaled up pretty quick. And then the problem became we didn't have the systems in place to handle that scale.
Mm-hmm.
So like I think it was when I started at my main offering was 400 a month, which lesson one was that wasn't enough. And then we got so many clients, we got up to like 17,000 a month in revenue within like 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
But it was basically me doing all the work. So that was like I had to pull 18-hour days to try and keep up with that, and I burnt out. And we ended up just like obviously mainly because I just took on too many people, not thinking. I lost a lot of those clients. So then we kind of raised the prices, which attracted kind of for us a kind of a nicer to deal with clientele.
Mm-hmm.
So we found that like keeping our prices a little bit higher generally brings in the type of clients that we fit better with. And then it's make sure you have the systems of scale. So like right now, one of our offerings, we actually limit it to 2 people a month because we just, as we're building it out, we realized just to do a good job the way we want to do, we can't take on more than 2 at a time. So we set those specific systems up, and now I'm planning out like, all right, where are we at a client load level? When would the next hire need to be? And we're planning that out instead of being reactive and being like, oh my God, we have so many clients, I got to hire someone to come on and do it. So I'm trying to predict what that's going to look like. Which did make a bit of a challenge during the pandemic when there was no regular seasonality anymore. Like kind of that seasonality normalcy, because I always knew like typically I'd hire in like the beginning of the year in preparation for the spring market, and then probably hire one more in the summer in preparation for the fall market, and I kind of do that. Whereas like a couple of years of the pandemic, there basically was no real spring summer type of thing like that. It was just nonstop all the time.
Well, it's interesting because you really touched on another really important part about being an entrepreneur is managing growth, right? Like you were growing so fast, and it's thrilling, obviously, but then you have to find time to bring in the support staff to keep it going. And and we're talking in 2022, and anybody I talk to in any business is struggling to bring in support staff. Like so, that's an issue, a new issue. I wanted to touch a little more on the pandemic. So you talked about how you would normally strategize. You need people at certain times of the year. How did it become clear to you that it was going to be there were no seasonality there was none anymore?
If you remember, like it obviously happened right at the beginning of the spring market. So everyone got a little worried, but overnight, like when Ford announced the shutdowns in Ontario, I think we lost 40% of our clients in 3 days.
Wow.
Because everyone was just super nervous about what was going on. But then by July, we had all that volume back and then some. So like it was a pretty fast, I was probably pretty worried for about a month.
Mm-hmm.
And then as like real estate as a career, like that wasn't part of like real estate agents could still work and go out and do things. Clients are like, okay, I think we'll be okay. And they started coming back. And then as the prices really started soaring, it never slowed down. But like that first 3 months, I was basically trying to balance having kids at home who were 1.5 at the time and 3 while working, and it became a lot of early mornings, late nights. And then every office wanted Zoom, so I was doing 3 to 4 office Zooms a day every day for like 2 months as everyone was making that switch to the digital. So it was a pretty exhausting stretch.
Mm-hmm.
And then one advantage we've always had as a company is that we've always been remote. Like since 7.5 years ago, I've fully remote. So the one actually really benefit for us is that everyone kind of adapted to our way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
Because like before, if I was say, hey, let's meet on Zoom, half the time I'd have to teach them how to use Zoom first.
Mm.
Whereas now it's just like second nature for everybody. Like very rarely does a technical issue that's user error happen now.
Mm-hmm.
Like yes, once in a while things happen with Zoom where it doesn't quite work, but it's usually not the person's fault. So like that's cut down a lot. And like even now as things opening back up, it cuts my travel time significantly. Because like before, if I went to go meet someone for a 1 hour at their office, I'm really killing 4 hours when you account for travel and everything by the time I get back and settled. Whereas now it's just the hour.
That's interesting. Zoom has really made a difference. I think sometimes in person is a good starting point, I've always found. But then once you have that, like you and I met you at Reality Plus. We had a nice chat and you know, also with Jordana. And now we kind of knew each other, and you were comfortable being a guest, and I was comfortable having you as a guest, and it kind of made it easier. So yeah, I think Zoom's a nice follow-up if you can plan it that way. Sometimes a lot of our guests actually I meet after I've had them as a guest. Yeah. So it really depends.
Like it as well, like Zoom both early on, like the first intro call, because you can tell right away if it's someone that's not going to be a good fit. So maybe now it's not, I'm killing half a day.
Right.
To know in 10 minutes, it's not going to be a good fit. I'd rather do the 10-minute Zoom, figure that out, and then use that to find the time in person.
Yeah. And, you know, in the old days, we used to do it with a phone call, right? You figure it out. But, you know, when you get the video included, it's very helpful. So you did touch on a moment ago about technology. Setting aside technology for your business, what are the technology tools that you, as a business person, rely on? What are the most important things you use?
So, like internally in our company, every day we're using 3 main things. One is Slack, because I hate email. So our team just uses Slack to communicate, which I just find now there's some cons to Slack as well over email, but it's a nice way to kind of on a remote team build camaraderie, communicate better. Then we use Asana, which is a task management. So it's like every client, you can go in, see what everyone's working on with every client, where they are at each step. And it's just a very organized place. Then you can duplicate, you know, systems, and it works really well. And then the other one is Notion, which is a newer one for us, but basically it's a tool that acts like the company's brains. Like all our SOPs are in there. Okay, and everything like that.
For those who don't know sorry to interrupt, but for those who don't know SOP,
standard operating procedure. It's basically our binder. I learned this from my dad. He literally just had binders used to be printed out behind him, and anything he'd ever do, you could go to that, pull it out, and be like, all right, this is the task for this day. This, and this. And early on, that's where I was very weak, because I was just plowing ahead, figuring things would fill in behind me. It didn't quite work out.
Okay. In terms of success, and you've had a lot of success with just sell homes. If you were to say, this is my biggest success, what would you say would be your biggest success from in that business up to this point?
Because I did see that you had that question. I thought about it for a long time, and I still think, like, with the success we've had, the biggest one for me that I look at is that I'm still able to drop my kids off and pick them up every day from school. Like, I know there's been a lot of like business things that are wins, but I know my dad, this was before technology, like he'd be up out the door every day at 5. He'd be lucky to be home by 6 every day. So the amount of time I got with him during the week was pretty low, which I understood why that had to happen, especially after I worked with him for a few years. But I wanted to kind of be there even more than that. So that's for me, the most important part is that I've been able to pull that off for them. Like, yes, there's the odd day I can't pick them up necessarily, but like even now I say no to things if I can't drop my kids off at school that morning. So I'm like, I can't do anything until I have enough time to drive after 9 o'clock from Newmarket.
Listen, I think that's so commendable. And I think your kids, when they get older, will appreciate it more than now, because now you're just their driver. Right. Yeah. But and also, you know, I one of the things I liked about real estate was there was no travel. So I could, when our kids were young, I could be around our kids. I worked with my wife, Rosemary, for 10 years before I had kids. And I remember as an agent, we were going somewhere socially, but someone said, can you drop by and just, you know, look, let us know what you think of the house. So, and it was, I guess, a past client. So we had like our 1-year-old with us, got in the house. She started wailing. And I learned never bring a kid to a client, which I don't think you would do anyway.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I've had a few where I've like actually done Zoom calls with like one on my lap. Like there's actually a meeting one time, it was like 30 of us, but like it was with Doug Ford. And I remember half the call, I actually like had my son rocking him to sleep on the call. I was like, I'm going to be muted for a lot of this one.
Oh, good for you. I think it's a great way to put value into where you want to spend time in life. Good for you. So let's move on to REM, which is where I got to meet you. And obviously it had been a very successful periodical. And so the question comes up, and I think I asked you this the first time we met. What motivated you to take over REM?
So I've always wanted to do something like this. And like I approached REM a couple of years ago to try and buy it. But we couldn't come together on numbers. And I don't think you at the time was that motivated to sell. It was more just like, hey, if they offer the right number, everyone has a price type of thing. And then I had even started looking into and planning my own media company. I was going to start my own and just compete directly with REM instead. And then when they announced they were shutting down, I probably had about that day 20 different people message me like, REM shut down, you got to reach out again. Because there's people who knew, although even some people who reached out had no idea I had tried to buy it. So I've always there's a need for this in Canada, because right now, if you took REM out, the only things are really American publications that might throw the odd Canadian article in there, but it's not a lot. So there's a need for it, and anytime there's a need for it, there's also potential business there. So I do like it from that the legacy side of it, but I also think on its own it's also a great business. But then it can also feed business to the agency as well. So it all kind of feeds in together really nicely, and there's benefits across the board.
So it's a great synergy, right?
Yeah.
What are the new ideas that you're planning for REM that haven't been there before?
A lot of it will be around we want to start bringing in more media types, because right now it's obviously almost entirely written content. And I have a few ideas for some shows I want to do. For example, I think I mentioned before we jump on air, I had an old show that I used to do pre-COVID. I'm going to be bringing that back, but it's going to come back as a REM show instead of a Just Sell Homes show, I believe. Obviously, Just Sell Homes will promote it a bit, but it'll mainly be a REM show. And we'll be looking at doing things like that, a lot of just new media attempts. Right now, though, we're kind of really diving deep into getting just accurate data on the email list, for example, because we want to make sure that when an advertiser comes to us, we have the right stuff for them. So for me, my first 12 months goal is get the content machine just running smoothly again, which Jordan has done an unbelievably great job since we hired her, getting that content out regularly. But I do want to get her help. I want to hire a staff writer. So probably in Q1 of next year, I think we'll bring on a staff writer to kind of ease some of that burden on her, and then essentially put out a little bit more content. So we'll get that going, bring in some shows, and then we'll start even bringing in eventually premium content. So right now, one thing that I always want to make clear with everyone though is there will never be a gated piece on the regular everyday content. I'm not going to gate news or anything like that. But what we might do would be advanced workshops on certain topics and pay guest experts to come in and do a really in-depth session. That will be premium content. And what we'll probably do is you could either buy it as a one-off, or if you're subscribing monthly, you get everything we put out like that. And then there'll be things like that. And then live events. This is actually one that Jim Adair, I was talking to him about. So when I was considering it, I brought Jim out for a beer. And one of the things I asked, where did you see some opportunities that maybe you didn't capitalize on? And his big one was we should have been doing live events. So I think eventually, and I've already done my own conference for Just Sell Homes. So I think we'll do that as the first one, as a joint REM JSH conference this July. And then start looking at doing more live events too.
Smart, good for you. The goal of being a publisher it's a bold goal, for lack of a better way to say it. What was it that attracted you? Or let me rephrase that. You already made the decision. What do you like about being the publisher?
I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I love kind of seeing the behind the scenes. I'm still learning it, right? I've been a publisher for about 3 months at this point.
Okay.
So I'm still learning a lot.
Understood.
But it does fit in with a lot of what I went to school. Actually, I got a degree in history.
Mm-hmm.
And even when I wrote back then, I was always writing the human side of it. So like I wasn't writing the strategy of the Battle of Somme. It was, what did the individuals go through who were on the front lines? What did their day-to-day look like? And that actually translates really nicely to journalism, where it's like, great, we have these big macro stories about real estate, but what does that mean for the realtor on the front line doing, what's their day-to-day? How's that changed now?
Mm-hmm.
And writing stories about that. So like it does kind of, I always had that little adventure, like what are people going through in the day-to-day? And I think a trade publication can do a really good job doing that, and diving into it. So I do like kind of telling people stories and kind of playing up that side of things, and showing the good that's out there, because I think there's so much negativity out there. So like we do a really big focus on, like, when we hear people doing good things in the community, we want to showcase it, as much of that type of content as possible.
Oh, cool. So there are people probably watching who like the idea of doing what you're doing with REM. In other words, publishing an online news magazine. Even though it's only 3 months, what would you say to someone if they said, Andrew, you've had all of 3 months to do this? What would you say to them if there was some interest in doing it?
I think one, you got to know who your audience is, like that by far. Like that was really easy with REM. I knew exactly who I wanted to be. That was already built in for them. Like for us, it was real estate agents in Canada, the real estate industry in general in Canada. But it's incredibly hard just to start a general one, like trying to start a one that's just on Canada, for example, or even North America would be way too broad. So it'd be like, I know now that I've been networking with other media people now, it's like I know people who do like hobbyist flying. Like it's people who fly hobby planes, not commercial planes. And his entire publication is about that. So it's like finding that niche that you want to serve. And then whether it's you or someone else, an editor, just a really good editor who understands journalism and how to do it. So like that was my big priority, was not someone with real estate experience, was someone with editing experience. And that's where I got really lucky with Jordana, where she was amazing, and now she's learning the real estate industry and getting up to speed on it really quick.
Okay, so let's give some time to Jordana, and the reason is my oldest daughter's name is Jordana, so I like saying the name. But I mean, she is like your, let's call it a co-pilot, right? She's driving the ship with you. What was her background? How did you get someone to come with you in essentially a startup, right? Because you're taking over.
So she has worked with Global News Toronto, City, CTV Toronto, CTV Vancouver, both on air and as a producer. Like she was the last year she was freelancing for Global. The 3 years before that, she was actually the producer of the 5 o'clock news in Toronto for Global.
Wow.
So like that was her background. But as you can imagine, if you're producing the 5 o'clock news for Toronto, that's a hectic life.
For sure.
So during the pandemic, I think she realized she kind of wanted to mix things up. So she spent the year, basically she quit Global and then worked as a freelancer for them so she could travel. And then I think she realized she wanted a more steady gig, and just kind of right place at the right time for both of us. And I give her that flexibility. Like, yes, there are some things like the AREA Reality Conference where she does need to be there in person. But if she wants to go work in Italy for a month, great. She can go work in Italy for a month as long as the content's still coming out. She might have to adjust her working time zones a little bit, depending on where she goes. But we offer her a lot of that flexibility and then complete control, right? Like she has full editorial control. For the most part, I only see articles the same time everyone else does.
Yeah, and that's actually when I spoke to you about how do we find a way to connect with the editor. You did say, just call Jordana. So one of the things that's going to happen as a result of this, I'm going to wrap it up in one more question, is there will be people now wanting to do what Jordana does for REM.
Yeah.
So let's give them the opportunity. If someone wants to reach you, what's the best way to reach you, Andrew?
So for me, it's Andrew at RealEstateMagazine.ca.
Okay.
If you want Jordana, it's Jordana at RealEstateMagazine.ca.
Okay.
So anything for like REM, if you just questions about how the business works or you want to advertise with us, that's me. If it's editorial related, that's Jordana.
Okay, great. So my last question is this. What's been, and you've had a lot of business experience, what's been the biggest challenge that you've had and what did you learn from it?
I think it's finding, for me, my toughest has been finding senior leadership in a company. It's like I've typically always hire junior people and then train them up.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have limits when you do that. And it's finding the right people, because then you get to dive into it a lot more. And it's finding the people who don't just talk a good game, but there's actually substance behind them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and then there's that little bit of like finding the people who genuinely care about the business. Like that's one thing that I love about Jordan is like, she genuinely cares and looks for opportunities to be better and constantly looking for feedback on how we can improve things and what everything's doing. Whereas like, you've hired people in the past, people who just kind of, they show up, they do the job, they put their hours in and they leave.
Well, actually, we never hired those.
Yeah. I had some mistakes early on in my career.
Yeah.
Of poor, like that was back when I was doing like reactive hiring.
Yeah, right. Well, reactive's different. You got a problem. You got to get somebody in there.
Exactly. So now that we're kind of playing it out and we can be proactive, we can take the time to find the right people.
Well, good.
But to me, it's always about the people that we hire.
Perfect.
That's always one of my biggest challenges.
All right, listen, I as I said when we started, I try to keep it to half an hour because I know how busy you are. And you have 2 little kids waiting for you on top of 3 little kids waiting for you on top of 2 businesses. So thank you for joining us. Perhaps we can get you back another time and just see how things are going. Sure. And, real pleasure to have time to talk to you this way, Andrew. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We'd like to thank Andrew Fogliato for joining us today and you for joining us today. And if you liked our podcast, please like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast network or on our YouTube channel. To get in touch with us, you can reach us either by email at info@rewithhd.com or on our website, rewithhd.com. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next time.